Welcome, everybody. It is Rare Disease Day 2024, and I'm really honored to be having a discussion today with these rare moms who are joining us to share about their experiences with brain tissue donation. Um, it's really, something that's been on my mind a lot for, both in my family and my community. And I think this is a conversation that many of us have maybe heard a little something about, but are really curious to learn more about what does it actually mean? What does it actually look like? We did do a webinar with this team, this group of organizations a while back that really, we shared some of your stories kind of generally, but then we also heard from two experts who work in the space of either doing collection and managing of brain tissue, and somebody who really does extensive research on that tissue. So we'll refer people back to that one to kind of hear more about the science side of things. Today, we're really focusing in on listening to the experiences and stories of these families, and helping to make sure that we have some clarity on what does it actually mean? What does it actually look like? And why is it important? So I'll stop sharing this and I'll pull up our folks here so you can see everybody. Really glad to have you all with us today. I'm going to do some quick intros. And I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Gabby Conacher. I am mom to an 11-year-old, Elliot, who has SCN2A DEE. And I'm the co-founder of Deep Connections, and really excited that you're joining us either live or on the recording, and taking advantage of all the resources we have for rare epilepsy families. So joining us today is Penny Howard, who is a CDKL5 navigator of Hope4Harper, which is a nonprofit organization created to provide hope through research and awareness to those living with CDKL5 disorder and other related diseases. I'm going to let her talk a little bit about her daughter and her journey, and let her kind of share that more. We also have Angie, mom to Amelia, who continues to honor her daughter's fight for an SCN2A cure with the first brain bank donation from their community. And in her heartfelt volunteer work with the FamiilieSCN2A Foundation's Crisis and Loss Committee, Angie is creating an inclusive space that welcomes and honors the memory of all children. She's also the executive director of the Smith-Magenis Syndrome Research Foundation, so is using her skills to continue to advocate in the rare space. And we have Shelley, who was born and raised in North Texas and has been married for 31 years to her husband, Wes. And she has two adult daughters, one grandson and one granddaughter on the way. Hooray. And her son, Reed, had a rare disease, CDKL5, and passed away in 2021 at the age of 18. So you're going to hear a little bit from each of these families talking about their children, their journey, and how powerful it can be to make this kind of a decision. And difficult. It's, I want to recognize before we dig in here that this is a topic that you probably have to kind of feel prepared to hear and talk about and listen to, because it's a very deeply personal and challenging decision. I will share that it took me 3 years to fill out the paperwork to sign my son up for brain donation, and it's not something that is done lightly. So I welcome you and applaud you for kind of being ready to have this discussion and listen and engage. And we'll definitely have opportunities, a little later for you to weigh in with your questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A throughout. And also, we'll make sure that you can reach people, some of these families later on if you still have questions afterwards. So all right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Angie to share a little bit about Amelia and your journey to donation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you everyone for being here today. I too want to acknowledge this Rare Disease Day. So many of you here have a child with a rare disease, a loved one, or you yourself have one. And I just want to acknowledge it's really brave to be here and to listen to this webinar and this discussion, because it's tough. So as I shared, my oldest daughter, Amelia, was born with a rare disease, SCN2A. She was my firstborn, absolute joy of my life. She passed away when she was 12 years old. I would give anything this May. She would be turning 18 to be planning an epic grad party instead of talking to all of you today about brain bank donation. But what I know is Amelia would be incredibly proud of her mom for continuing to fight on and talk to all of you about brain bank donation, because it is so much her legacy. It's a hard conversation. I always want to say when I agree to do things like this, you know, it's painful to go back to those moments of the end of my daughter's life. But I always say yes, because if I had had access to information like this, to hearing from families who made this decision, it would have been so helpful. So I want to do that for you today. A little bit about how we came to our decision to donate. So what I always say about Amelia is it was always like she was on the edge of a cliff with her seizure disorder. Any small thing like a seizure or a cold coming into our house would send her into status. She'd go off the edge of the cliff, and it would be a PICU stay. When Amelia was 9 years old, she a cold came into her house and she went into status, and that was the first time that we almost lost her. She needed to take a lifelink flight from our small town down to the Mayo Clinic, and I remember just begging for more time. Um, that was the first time that her team really talked to us about what we wanted the end of Amelia's life to look like. And it was, you know, I'd been through a lot of scary things having a child with, you know, a life-threatening seizure disorder to that point, but it was the scariest, you know, that it had ever been. And, you know, gratefully that time we were able to find something that got Amelia out of status, and she was able to come home and kind of work to get back to baseline. But my husband and I were confronted with a very real reality that our daughter may not make it into adulthood. And in the quiet moments, this is always what I recommend to all the parents and people that I talk to about donation. If at all possible, to have these conversations when your child or loved one is not in medical crisis, that is what I recommend doing. So when my husband and I got back home, Amelia was doing okay, and we knew we had to have a really hard conversation. So we sat down together. And how we went into it is, we're never going to need this. That's what we told ourselves. But just in the wanting to be prepared for all things, but you know, you hope that you're never going to need that. We talked about, you know, some of the things that they asked us when Amelia was looking like she was going to not make it. And for us, what it came down to, you know, when our child been born with a rare disease, it changed our life, it changed our family, it changed the way we saw the world. We saw our daughter suffer almost every single day of her life with seizures and the battle that she had. And when she was diagnosed, she was the first diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. You know, she would be 18 now. There was no research, there was not a foundation, there was no information. And we absolutely believe in science, in research. We know that these rare diseases are going to get to treatment options and cures, but we knew that it needed to be gifts, donations like this to get us there. So my husband and I, you know, we just said, if there is anything we could do for families to not have to watch their loved one, their child go through what Amelia is going through, that we knew we wanted to be a part of that. So we really came to the decision that we wanted to give the gift of donation, and it was the first in our community because we wouldn't want anyone else to suffer the way Amelia suffered. So that's really how we came to our decision.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about Amelia. We know she was an incredible warrior, and I love, you know, your mantra is fight on. And I always think of that, and I think of you, and I think it's a powerful way to keep our kids' memories alive is keep fighting and sharing. So thank you for being willing to share that with us today. Penny.
Yes. So our daughter was Harper. She was born in 2010. She was our second. And she was diagnosed with CDKL5 disorder at about 9 months old, but her seizure started at about 2 weeks old. And when she was diagnosed, we met this incredible research scientist who was also her diagnosing doctor, Dr. Francis Janssen. And we had already seen a few patterns in Harper's seizures. And so we asked her if she would do research based on the patterns we were seeing for us. And she said yes. And so because of her yes, our organization was created, which was Hope4Harper, because we needed a way to fund the research we said yes to. And our hope was to give a better quality of life to Harper and inadvertently also others living life with CDKL5. And what we realized as time progressed is that it wasn't as easy. The science wasn't as easy, and it took a lot of time. And she passed away in 2016 when she was just over 5 years old. But it took me 2 years to figure out how to donate her organs to science. So 2 years prior to her passing is when I started trying to find out how would we donate her brain to science, because I feel like that's what is really needed to, elevate the research to the next level. And it was very challenging because this is a topic nobody really wants to talk about. And when you start asking questions, in your rare communities, I think everybody experiences this. Somebody's doing poorly all of the time. So it's really hard to bring the topic up and figure out who you can talk to. And so I reached out to some people privately and to some scientists and Dr. Janssen. And actually, it wasn't until 30 days before Harper passed, exactly 30 days to the day, that I knew how to go about donating Harper if, when the time came for her passing. And so, the thing for me was, it really was Harper's organ donation, her brain donation, that took our research to the next step, because they used her brain. She was also the first in our community to be donated. And they used her brain in the project. And that is when the project was finished and published, because they finally had a human brain to look at to really get a conclusion that they couldn't find using just the mice models and things. And I don't know exactly if there was something exactly that led me to this. I think it was just a growth that led to this, because what I had wanted was this research, this project, this next level, this better quality of life. And I wanted that information. And I realized, I guess, that it was going to take something different to obtain that information. And so I just thought, I need to donate her so she can continue to be helpful, because sharing her information was already helping other people. And so I just wanted her to continue to be helpful. And I don't know that I had a moment like Angie, where I sat down and really talked to my husband about it. I didn't, I just, he's very private. And so even in creating the organization, I didn't really ask. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to share Harper with the world. And my response to that was, as private as you are, this problem, this disease, this thing we're dealing with as a family, as a couple, is bigger than what we can deal with on our own. And we're going to need support outside of just the two of us. And so we have to share. And that's what we're going to do. And he let me do that. He was very supportive, and he saw that. And so I think from that, he just kind of let me do what needed to be done. And if he disagreed, he would say something, but he didn't disagree. So we just went with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so powerful. And I think you bring up this sense of, we've got to move the needle, and it's got to be something bigger and different than what's happening now. The status quo isn't good enough. And so we need things that are stronger and more powerful, like the actual brains of our children that that have the impact of this disorder that show the connectivity in the brain. And it's, thank you for sharing. It's powerful. Shelley, love to hear a little bit about your journey.
So our son is Reed. He was born in 2003, and he started having seizures when he was about 3 weeks old. And they just every day would just, many seizures. And he was our youngest. He was our third baby. So my husband works, he's a firefighter EMT, so he had a little bit of medical knowledge. And we weren't the kind of parents to panic. So we just started going to doctors trying to figure out what was going on. They would do all these tests. He had so many MRIs, so many EEGs, and nothing would ever, really come of it. So we just kind of resumed life and, treated him just like we did our other kids. We just took him everywhere with us, drug him along, seizures and all. I had quit work to stay home with him. And it just became our new normal, was all the stuff. And as he got older, around 7, we started having some of the breathing issues because he was non-mobile. He technically never got past, like the infant stage of development. So we, by the time he was 9, he started having what we now know were chorea episodes, but at the time we didn't really realize what it was. So we started digging into it again. What's wrong with him? Why is he having these seizures? What's going on? Because before nobody could ever, give us an answer other than in the beginning, he would outgrow it. So like I said, we were just pretty laid back about it, just trying to figure it out. Well, we ended up going to Detroit and saw a specialist up there. They did a lot of testing, and that's when they finally told us that he had CDKL5. So he was 9 when we finally got the diagnosis. When we started trying to look for, groups or trying to connect with people, I came across Penny because one of Reed's OTs, when I mentioned that he had finally been diagnosed, she said, "Oh, well, I have another patient that has that." Of course, she wouldn't give me any information, but then she's like, "You should check out this great organization called Hope4Harper." So that's kind of how it connected me to Penny. So it just felt like Reed was always, the science project. We were the ones teaching the doctors about him and what his normal was. And, yes, he sounds horrible today, but he's really fine. And, yes, he'll have a seizure, but he's fine afterwards. So, following meeting Penny and Harper and then seeing, what they went through in the brain donation, we just thought that was naturally the next step was to donate Reed's brain, because they didn't have any male brains. And the CDKL5 is not as prevalent in the boys as it is the girls. You see a lot more girls with it. So Reed was pretty rare in, his own sense. And we just felt, we didn't even really talk about it. I don't think it was just like, oh, we're doing that because Reed was put here to teach people stuff is kind of how we felt like. So he just needs to continue that legacy and keep teaching. So I, got with Penny, we had lunch and I'm like, how do we do this? So she's like, you need to get the paperwork from Harvard. So I went on, got that, and we signed up right away. We just knew that that's what Reed was meant to do. So for us, it was a hard decision, but yet it was an easy decision based on Reed's life. So, and then when he passed away, we were prepared. We already knew what we were doing, and that's how it happened.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shelley. And I feel like you raised a really important idea about like, is just what you thought was that's the way it was going to be. Right. And so like,
right,
guys sharing your experience, the experiences are kind of normalizing this idea that like, we have an opportunity here. Not everybody's going to choose it, but it's putting forward the opportunity to say, this is a critical next step in how, we can contribute. We do things like fill out surveys and do, give blood samples, all those kinds of things. And this is next level, how we can all contribute to moving the field forward. And it's not just for our own disorders, right? I mean, every single rare epilepsy brain that is contributed, from my understanding, can be a powerful tool in helping us look at just like close to 1,000 rare epilepsies that we know of now, right? So, and I'll share that when I was counseling a family recently who was considering, this was a child who was in very poor condition at the time of her passing. And I was in touch with the brain bank and I said, you know, this is the state of things. And they're like, typically those are not the kind that we prefer, you know, because there's so much going on. But when it's such a rare disorder, even those brains are really, really powerful, because they have a story to tell and contribute to helping us learn more. So I'm going to stop talking now, but I get really, you know, excited about this because I think it's just such an incredible opportunity, if people choose to do it, to really find a way. I'm hoping that maybe we can kind of, you know, the last webinar, we got some feedback that like, what does the actual logistics look like? So I was hoping that we could kind of hear from each of you a little bit about what that looked like. I know some of them haven't been as recent and things might change and it might be different depending on what bank you use or where you live or those kinds of things. But, you know, maybe share a little bit about, you know, the kind of paperwork that you did, the discussions that you had to have to kind of get the logistics in place. And then when it was actually happening, what did that actually look like? So I'll go through the same roundabout. So Angie, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Okay. So I feel like a lot of people will relate to this part of my story. So my husband and I made the decision, yes, we want to do that. But that's the furthest we went. I had no idea, like there's brain banks and you can go there and they have information and you can fill out things ahead of time. No idea. But what I did have is a connection to my daughter's rare disease organization, the FamiilieSCN2A organization. So, and we also had the gift of time. So I'll speak a little bit about that. So, my daughter had shared, started really to decline when she was 9 years old. So a lot of frequent PICU visits where we would go in and try to get her out of status. She'd be in for a month and then we go home and we try to get back to baseline. And those hospital visits just kept getting closer and closer together, and baseline kept getting further and further away. Her team had been with us for many years. We were all seeing the decline. We were doing everything we could, but very much felt that Amelia's time, we were all seeing that her fight was coming to an end. The last time she went into the hospital when she was 12 years old, we were in the PICU for over a month. So we were seeing a rapid decline and we were seeing her body start to shut down. So we did have, like I said, I see it as a gift of time. We were able to have our entire family come and say goodbye to Amelia while she was still living. I was able to, probably 2 weeks before she passed, it was very clear that, you know, she wasn't going to make it. So we were able to start, I reached out to the president of my daughter's rare disease organization, who was a close friend. And, you know, I told her that I wanted to do this, and absolutely will be grateful for my entire life. Like, she moved mountains to make this happen. So I always recommend to people now, this was 5 years ago. A lot has changed. You absolutely should, if you're, you know, working with a rare disease, involved with them, reach out and see if they're using a certain bank. Otherwise, you know, your local brain bank, we have information in our last webinar about that. But that information, the process, I absolutely know they've streamlined that. They have so many resources for families now. So, but anyway, at that time, Amelia's team at the Mayo would do absolutely anything for her, and they knew our wishes and they wanted to make that happen. So we were able to get so many things in place before Amelia, we knew it was coming. So I know that's not something that a lot of families get to have, but with her passing away in the hospital, you know, at the Mayo Clinic, they were able to handle a lot of the aspects that some families when they're at home have to do, and I did not. So for us, I think, you know, it was very important that we had her, you know, she was the first donation in our community. So we kind of helped with that process of, okay, this is what it looked like for us. Now let's make it easier for other families, because it was kind of traumatic for all of us involved. It's hard when you wanted to do a donation like this. Part of you has to go into a mode of, I want to make this happen. and you want to be grieving your child, you want to be with your family and grieving, and you still want this to happen. And because it was so important to us, you went into that mode of, I'm going to make this happen. And I was grateful for the people in my life, having a point person at my organization who was taking care of it. We were involved with hospice and palliative care at that time at Mayo, and they took over there. So I totally felt the support of everyone around me that wanted to make sure our wishes were and everything was done correctly. But I do want to tell you, if you make this decision, and this was 5 years ago, there is a part of you that has to be willing to step away from the grieving parent role for a small amount of time and make sure that this happens. And I feel like for us, 12 years into the fight, changing state laws and advocating for as much as we had, I was able to kind of separate a little bit and do that. But I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life. But what I will tell you after, it has been so important for me in the grieving process to know. So my daughter participated in a ton of research, anything that we could before this point. She did a tissue sample, all of those things. I know she wanted to be part of a cure for SCN2A. When the day comes, because I say when, my daughter will have contributed to that. And that is so powerful. I still feel connected to her organization. So in grief at 5 years, when people are uncomfortable talking about my daughter, I can go to my community and they know Amelia. They talk to me about Amelia. I have families in my community when they lose their warriors that we can gather together and we can talk about this life that was so different than anyone else lived. So it's been very powerful to know that she's still contributing. And I'm so, happy that, everything was able to happen. But I just want you to know it was incredibly hard. And I just, want people to be aware that they are doing everything they can to make that process easier. But there's just parts of it that are extremely hard.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight that you have to kind of like be in business mode and you have to kind of like deal with logistics and decision making and calling people. And I think something that a number of people talked about when we were doing some of our prep discussions was designating somebody who could help you with that. And that was, the organizational leader. And for others, it might be a family member or, a friend who's willing to kind of be the go-between. Because, I mean, Penny, tell us, like, practically speaking, this happens and you have to make a call. You recognize that it's imminent or it has just happened, that your child has passed. Now
Yeah.
what?
So for me, it was 8 years ago. So I have, it's a lot different now than it was then. But I think there's a few things I think I want to say about this. One, now you can, like, for you, you filled out paperwork, but that's not the end all be all. You still have to make that call. If you don't make the call, then you can, go back on that decision. You can change your mind. Do you know what I mean? So it's when you make the call, then things are just a lot easier because you've already filled out the paperwork, right? So just because you make the decision to go ahead and make the process easier, if you decide to do that, you still have to decide to do that in the moment by making that call. For me, I didn't know. I was like Angie, I didn't know about brain banks or anything like that. What I had was another rare organization who gave me a phone number. And this was 30 days prior. They were like, we've got a process, and Harper went into the hospital. We had 2 days. And it was the first time I was like, oh, she could really not make it. And so I need to ask now. And I text my friend and I said, Harper may not make it. I need to know what to do. And they text me a phone number and said, call here. And in my mind, because nobody had talked about this, I literally thought that the decision I had made was that as soon as she passed, she was gone from me. And sorry. And I was okay with that because I knew the end result would be hopefully better, making a bigger move for this needle, right? But that's not what happens. And I'm really grateful for that. But I wish I had known, And so I feel like also, there is a job component to this, like Angie said, but like Angie and I had to do jobs in the moment because we didn't know. And I feel like if you are in a place where your child is not in a crisis and you can put these things together, then you can delegate a little bit more, right? I was delegating in the midst of this. I didn't grieve Harper until this job was done. I mean, it was a job, and we didn't have the gift of time. And so, you know, I feel like if you know all the components necessary, then you can call on different people and let people know and build something so that you can grieve. You still have to do a little bit of the job, but you have people in place that are helping you make this happen, because you'll need it, even if you just wait to the last minute and you're in a position like Angie and I. You know, you'll still need some grieving time, and there'll still be a job component for you to do, but you have more grieving time, you know, to be in that place of loss. If you will think this through a little bit and put things in place for you to make it easier beforehand. That's just something that I think is hugely important to know. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Penny.
Sorry, I'm a crier.
No, and you all make me cry because it's so, I mean, because it's such a gift that you thought like, I'm not going to have that time. And you said it's worth it because it means that she's giving this legacy, right? So,
There was one more thing I
it's
wanted to
just
say.
very, very,
I'm sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to say. I will be honest with you on this, as something I didn't really think about until we were in the midst of this webinar. And I'll be brief because I know Shelley needs to share her experience too. It's very different than the rest of ours. But I think that for me, I also donated Harper because I didn't really want her to die. And I felt like it was the only thing I had left. And I'll tell you, this was so weird. I had nightmares after donating her, and I would call Harvard and be like, okay, so what happens if your electricity goes out? Right? Because I just didn't, because if you lost Harper, then the things I had donated, because I donated her living tissue and her brain, then there's no more Harper to give. I already gave her. You can only give her once. You know what I mean? And so I think that really was also, you know, a realistic driving force for me personally as well. Now I've come more to terms with all of that, but I think that was something that should definitely be mentioned because someone else might have the same feelings.
makes sense to me. Yeah, I can totally see how that was your thinking process. So, very powerful. Okay, Shelley, would love to hear from you, like what this process looked like and how that worked for your family.
So for us, like I said, we had already filled out the paperwork probably about 3 or 4 years prior to Reed passing. There had been a couple of times when he was about 12 that he was in the hospital and things had gotten, you know, a little rough. We didn't think he was going to make it. He had also been on hospice a couple of times, not because it was end of life. It was just because of, you know, so many things involved with him. So particularly the night that he passed away, ironically, he wasn't even sick. It was just another normal day of Reed, seizures, you know, respiratory, all his normal stuff. And our family had actually gone out that night and our nurse was here with him. And we had 2 nurses that had been with us for quite a while that knew him really well. And so she kept texting me that, you know, his heart rate was a little high and then it would go down. And it's what we called Reed being Reed. You know, he never had the same day twice. He was just all over the page. And that was just expected from him. So we got home later. She left and my husband had stayed up with him. My husband had to work the next morning. And so we weren't going to have a nurse. So I went on and went to bed. And he came and woke me up. It was about 2:00 in the morning. And he said that Reed had just stopped breathing. And I was like, well, okay, just, you know, he was already on his BiPAP. He had his pulse ox on. And he's like, I tried everything. And he said, it didn't work. So I went in there and, I'm just thinking, well, he's tired, whatever. And I just kind of rubbed on him and stuff. And, we both looked at each other and just came to the realization that, Reed, that was it. And so we had always said, probably 10 years prior to that, Reed had pretty much determined his own life. And when Reed decided that he was done, that he was done. And we had had a DNR in place on him for probably 10 years before that night. And we had had several talks where we knew in our heart that when it came to it, that was it. We weren't going to, we were just going to let him go. So we were okay with that. And so we just kind of sat there in his bed with him and held his hand. And, we were just sitting there, just sitting with him. And about 30 minutes later, it just popped into my head. I was like, oh crap, we're donating his brain. Like, we're supposed to do something. And he was like, oh yeah. So I ran to my desk and I knew exactly where my paperwork was. So I called the number and it was to Harvard. And I explained to them that, he had just passed, we were at home, and what do we need to do? And well, we called our pediatrician first because Penny had mentioned the human tissue sample and how you had to have a certain container and it had to be done, so quickly. So our pediatrician had agreed, we had set all this up beforehand, he was going to do it for us. Well, when I called him in the middle of the night, he was actually in another state on vacation. So then when I called Harvard, we realized that they didn't really do the live tissue sample. You didn't have to have it with the brain donation. So we were relieved to learn that. So when I'm talking to Harvard, they said, well, what funeral home are you using? And I was like, I don't know. We never thought about this because, like I said, Reed wasn't even sick. So then she said, well, we need to know so that we know where to go and, do his brain donation. And I was like, okay, well, let me call you back. So like I said, it's, now 3 a.m. and I'm calling the local funeral home. We live out in the country. We'd only lived here about 5 years. We didn't really know much about town, but I called the local one. The lady was really nice. And she said, okay, well, has the coroner came? And I was like, well, no, I mean, you're like the first person I've called. And she's like, oh, well, you have to call the county and have the coroner come out. I was like, okay. So I call that number and that ends up being the sheriff's department. Well, because of death at home unexplained and, it creates some issues apparently. So they have to send the sheriff out and the sheriff has to talk to us and, what happened. And it kind of started feeling a little weird because we felt like, they were not accusing us, but it just became a real weird situation all of a sudden. And in my mind, everybody that walked through my door, I said, look, we're donating his brain. I have 6 hours. Like, whatever we got to do, we got to get it done. And that was my main focus. It wasn't, like Penny said, it wasn't grieving my child right then. I was on a mission and this is what we wanted to do. And we were going to get it done. And everybody that came through our door knew it. So through the next few hours, we had, 2 or 3 sheriff's deputies. We had phone calls with our pediatrician. Luckily, he talked to the sheriff's office when they were here to explain to them that, yes, Reed was sick and that we were good parents and that this was natural and so on and so on. So once all that was finally cleared, they sent the coroner out and to pick him up. And that was probably the hardest was, them taking him. But we ended up, the sun was coming up as he left and we got him there just in time. So ours was definitely different. It was also, he passed away. It'll be 3 years this summer. So it was in 2021 when COVID wasn't as prevalent, but it had kind of made a little bit of a surge. So we wanted to have an open casket funeral, and that was one of my concerns. And we were assured that we could still do that. It wouldn't be a problem. So they took Reed to the I guess the crematory is what they call it. And that's where the brain bank person met them to do the donation. And then after that, the next time we saw him at the funeral home, I mean, he looked absolutely perfect. You couldn't even tell. There was like a little scar behind one of his ears that we found because we were just curious. But he looked perfect. It wasn't even noticeable, even to us, that, he was missing something, which for us, it was a gift that we gave. So that's kind of how our story went.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Shelley. And, we had a question come in about how does it work if it happens at home? And I think you hit on a lot of that. And I don't know if Angie and Penny, you guys have counseled many families, if there are other things that families should keep in mind if this happens at home that you think we should kind of put out there on the table.
I think you need to know that you can't, to my knowledge, you cannot do a autopsy and donate because of time constraints in that. So I think that's important to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, there's a choice there. If you need to investigate kind of what's happened, that's not, part of the plan.
Well, and I think too, for us having the DNR, I think really made things go smoother. If we had not had that, I don't know that we would have been able to do the donation, because they probably would have required an autopsy to figure out cause of death. But because of his medical history, and we had the DNR, and our pediatrician was able to call and talk to them, I think that helped our process move a little smoother as well.
And I also think, see, in your situation, nobody was there. I mean, you were there, but people who are palliative care or hospice or whatnot, a medical professional is there. And so that means that the at-home death is seen slightly differently than in your situation. And so the steps and things would be different. And that's why I think communication, like Angie had mentioned, is hugely important. If this is something that you want to do, you need to tell everybody on the team. You need to tell your doctors, you need to tell palliative care, you need to tell hospice. You need to just tell people this is what we're doing, and not necessarily ask them their opinion, but tell them this is what we're doing, so that they all are on the same page and can help you achieve your goals. Because I think that's what they're all there to do anyway.
I would add to that too, since we're talking about telling people. I think one thing that I've talked to a lot of families that have asked me questions about is, what do you do when your extended family doesn't agree with this decision? So, you and your partner can decide one thing, yes, we want to donate. But if you don't go the next step to telling your parents, and maybe, an aunt or uncle who's close in your life who might have a different opinion, that can just present a lot of issues when you don't want to be having those issues. So one thing that I recommend is, once you and your partner make that decision, go ahead and talk to those close to your family, friends, your extended family in your life, and tell them that this is your decision. And then I get asked a lot, well, what do you do if my mother-in-law doesn't agree with this? And I always suggest, sitting down and talking with them and maybe educating them on why you made this decision. So if your child, say, has a rare disease like ours, reach out to your rare disease organization. Say, hey, can we have a Zoom? Will you tell them what a donation like this means for our community? Because I bet all those rare organizations would love to do that. Reach out to your brain bank. They have a ton of resources. They would also have a conversation with you, because I always think education goes, so far in this, and for people to understand, answer some of those questions, like, can we still have our celebration of life? Can we still have our funeral? Can it all look the same? And really, after you answer those questions, a lot of your family members will be okay with it. But when you go through child loss, you are going to need your support system. So you do not want to do something that is going to cause a huge issue in your family. This is a forever decision. I'm very involved with my local bereaved moms group. We meet once a month, and the moms that have the hardest time in child loss is when something is done around the time of death that they didn't agree with and they can't take back. So I just always say, if you and your partner feel really strongly about doing donation, you don't want to let a family member talk you out of that, because you don't want to regret something that's forever. But also know in your heart that you really are going to need the support of your family. So trying to talk to them before, when you're making this decision, and helping them understand why and how goes a long way. for my family, we moved to our small community to be by our parents because we knew we needed the help. So they watched my daughter have, seizures her entire life. They gave the rescue meds. They knew it was very serious. And they also agreed that they wanted, Amelia to be part of having other families not have to go through that. But, I've talked to a lot of people that, because of religious reasons or different reasons that hasn't worked. So I just want to be clear to don't brain bank donation is not for everyone, and that is okay too. Like I know some of our families might feel a lot of pressure that they have to make this decision, and that's not the case. You have to do what's best for you and your family because it is forever.
Right. And you have this, I mean, if you're watching this webinar, there's the webinar that should be right above it or attached to it somehow that the doctors talked about the importance of this. And that's something you can share with your extended family members as well. But again, I think you just have to decide, right, the direction you want to go. I mean, you're not trying, you know what I mean? You just have to make your decisions and be okay with the consequences of those decisions too. And I think, yeah, you touched on something really important. It is not for everyone, and that is okay. And not everybody should feel like they need to do it or pressured to do it or feel bad about doing it. I've counseled a few people that have made the choice not to do it for whatever reasons. One was religious reasons. One was just because they felt like they didn't have the ability, the strength, knowing the certain job component type tasks that needed to go into doing something like this. They just were not going to be mentally capable when they really thought about where they would be emotionally in the moment. They just felt like this was not something they wanted to put on their plate. And I 100% supported them in that decision. I think it's important to really think about what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, Angie, your point about making sure you have those conversations early so that you're not having them in the moment and later when it's hurtful and sad and emotional, right? And then Penny, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're putting this out there, this resource as an opportunity for consideration, right? What does it look like? And we want to try to give as many details as we can. And I want to welcome people to continue to put questions in the Q&A or thoughts at all to contribute, so that this gives you the opportunity to weigh it, right? Can I do this? Can I pull this off? Will my community stand behind me, or will it be really painful? So I think I want to talk a little bit too, because I know this has come up before about what it means for the funeral. And Shelley, you said everything, Reed looked beautiful and everything was perfect. And whether you choose, open casket is still an option. Everything open, everything is still totally possible. Cremation, whatever you choose, right? So I don't think that, the decision to make a donation keeps you from doing anything you would have in mind for an end of life celebration or funeral.
Right. I mean, we had his funeral. It was a week after he passed, and like I said, you couldn't even tell that that anything had been done that made him look different. He looked perfect. We did the open casket. I mean, that just exactly how we wanted it to go.
And maybe we could also talk, I mean, about some things that you can do to kind of keep hold of your child. I mean, I think Penny, your revelation that you did this because you just didn't want to ever let go of her or ever say goodbye or ever, be gone. And I mean, that really resonates. But there are lots of, I mean, the world being what it is today, there's so many things you can do to keep your child with you. What are some of the things that you guys have heard about are kind of keepsakes or ways to, memorialize?
There's a lot that you can do. There's some things you need to do, even if you're not going to donate or whatever, there's things you need to do beforehand because you can't go back and do them again, right? Like, one of the things we did was we had Harper's handprint. And we were able to take that handprint and make it, through Etsy, I think, have found somebody who can make it into a keychain where it's actually, you can feel the handprints, like physically feel it on the keychain. I suggest people keep a lock of hair, also, because, we had, Heart and Diamond, make, a diamond that went on the inside of Dustin's wedding ring, so it's unseen, so it could be close to him. And they made that out of Harper. Basically, they turned Harper into a diamond, which was really a cool process to watch. And it's a cool little bitty diamond to have. I mean, you could get any size you want, but that's something that we did. They also we cremated Harper, and you can use ashes as well in doing those things. They also have jewelry. I have a bracelet and got a clasp that you can put some of the ashes into the clasp of the bracelet. They have other things like necklaces and whatnot. And even we have, Harper had siblings. And so one of the things we did is went to the funeral home and picked out an urn for each sibling that was a small one. And we divided her up into, each sibling would have a piece of her with them. And then we kept the rest of the remains. I mean, they just make all kinds of things that you can navigate around if you with regards to grieving elements.
One of the cool things we did, and they had done it where they took him, they had done a thumbprint. So we had his thumbprint. We were able to we ordered my husband a pocket knife that has Reed's thumbprint and his initials and stuff in it. And then from his, because we also cremated him. So me and the girls took some of his ashes and had jewelry made into necklaces as well. So yeah, there is a lot, but if like the thumbprint, if you don't ask them to do it, they don't automatically do it. So you just kind of have to make yourself a little checklist, unfortunately, of, things to remember when you need to remember them.
Right.
And I would say, if your child passes away or is in the hospital. So for the Mayo Clinic was really set up for end of life for families. So they had a professional photographer that would come in and take pictures if you wanted to. You could have a hand, so they would put your hand in so you could hold the hand, several of the things that they both shared. But what I also want to encourage all of you listening, if you have a very sick loved one, do those things now while they're living. You are never going to regret taking too many pictures, doing those things now. I took 1 million pictures. I have a lot, but it's never enough. So I just always recommend, do that now, but also, yes, if you don't have the option, make sure that you the funeral homes really have a ton now that they can do too for you, but you just maybe have to ask. So.
Well, and that's true about the pictures, because once your child passes, all you have is the pictures that you had. So every year you want to, celebrate them on their birthday or whatever, you still only have those same, which, in essence, old pictures. So yes, take plenty of pictures.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to pay for them either. I just can't tell. I mean, I know everybody's in a different financial position, and I think that's okay. And I would just say, if you have a rare child, then, I mean, whether they're 5 like Harper or 50, those pictures are all that's going to be left.
Mm-hmm.
Take the pictures.
Take family pictures as a group. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
We got lucky. We had done that just 6 months prior, and it had probably been 3 years prior to that before we had done them. So, even if somebody just takes a picture of you with their phone, get your family together and get that picture.
Yeah, that's great advice. We did have a question come in about how much of your final time with your child is limited by needing to begin the process of donation. And I think we kind of started getting at this, that if you're in a hospital, it might be a little bit different because they can handle some things. If you've designated someone who can help you do some of the logistics and it's a little bit different. I mean, it's important to recognize that about 6 hours is that time frame, as you mentioned, Shelley, right? You've got about 6 hours before the body has to be available for collection and refrigerated.
It has to be refrigerated within 6 hours. The collection's done within 24 hours. Refrigeration has to happen within 6. So you really get about 5 hours of time with them. Before I got antsy at the 5 hour mark, I was like, they need to come, and because I would be upset if we missed this.
That's
Like,
how I was.
but the first thing you need to do, I think, is if you have things set in place, the first thing you need to do is call. You're going to call the person you have designated to help you put things in place, and then you're going to call the brain bank that you've selected and let them know. Right. And then a lot of work happens behind the scenes. Like, so then at that point, you can be with your child, bathe your child, all these things with your child and your husband and your family or whoever you have that you've wanted to do. And then just at the, 5 hour mark, start understanding that the time is limited there.
And it's never going to be enough time, right? I mean, you always want more time. So whether it's 6 hours or 12 hours, I mean, it's never going to feel like enough. But
the other thing you need to remember too, so it's not just 5 hours, right? So that even though we cremated Harper, right? So I had 5 hours with her in passing. And I'll tell you, in the hospital, I have pictures I'll never show to anyone because she looked horrible. Like, she was like puffy, like nothing was being absorbed. It was all just going under her skin. She was purple. Like, she didn't look like Harper. It wasn't her, And but so I got that 5 hours of time with her, and we bathed her and got her all, ready and all these things. And then they took her for refrigeration, and then overnight they came and they harvested her organs. And then she was in the funeral home, and she was waiting for cremation. Well, we went, so it was now 2 days later, and we went to the funeral home to see her because we had asked, can we see her one more time before cremation? Well, a funeral home, upon death of anyone, doctors everybody up, because if you have the open casket, they make them look all pretty. She looks so good. I am sad I didn't bring Lily. I don't know how that would have been. I think now I could have, but then she was so little, I just didn't know. And I didn't think to ask her, but it was beautiful, and it was perfect. And it was the best thing I could have ever done, was to go back and see her, so if you ask, you can have that.
We did that too. And it was actually 30 days after Rita passed before they cremated him, because of the surge in COVID, there was a backup. But we told them we want to come see him one last time, just so in our mind we knew, and we did. So yeah, I mean, you have to ask, but yeah, they're pretty open to whatever you need.
yeah, I think I mean, we could talk for a much longer about this, I'm sure, but I think it's, really important to remember a few things, which is that if this is something that you think you want to do, you can do the paperwork now and get the paperwork out of the way. If you decide in the moment it's something you want to do, you can still do it. You don't have to have paperwork in place. You can make that call, have everything taken care of, and then down the line, a month or two later, manage paperwork and all of that. I think there's a very high priority. Banks are very eager to help our families get these samples in. They know the incredible scientific value of having this kind of resource available for research. Obviously everything is voluntary. You don't have to do anything. If you sign the paperwork in advance, like Penny said, you don't have to make that final call if you just decide you're not ready. But I think I want to close just with extreme gratitude for all of you for being willing to go back and revisit this and share what this was like for you and your family. And recognize that, this is a gift that you give, not just for your disorder, but for the community and for all of us, and sharing your stories and making contributions to advance, the research and scientific understanding of neurological disorders and advancing the understanding of the brain, frankly. So I think, yes, please.
I would like to make one final plug for the brain bank. If you're choosing to do this, which is phenomenal and very valuable within your rare disease, researchers need control brains as well. And you become a phenomenal control brain because you are a normally developing one compared to your child who's not. So something to consider in
That's a great point.
doing that as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, so any other closing thoughts before we end today? I just have such gratitude and love for all of you, and the way that you've given to all of us, and your stories. And there's a lot of love coming in here. So take that in, absorb it this Rare Disease Day. And I hope that you leave today knowing that hopefully there are more families that have heard the power of this, how it's challenging. There's no question that, it's not an easy thing to do, but it really is a powerful gift. So thank you. We will put a bunch of resources up on the website as well, to help families. And of course, all of these amazing moms have said that they're available to speak to families. So just reach out to us at Deep Connections if you want to do that, or to your rare disease organizations as well. So thank you all. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
you.